Kia ora and welcome back to another video in the series about setting up your clip. So today what I wanted to do is play with the scenario of imagining in my group that we'd all assigned ourselves tasks after making this session, which I'll just open up, which has the memory locations for individual scenes running along the top and is populated with individual tracks for each sound, or in this case different music types, different dialogue types and different effects tracks. And as you can see, or you can actually look on another video if this is a bit mysterious, how did I get to here? There's another video, the very first one, that sort of goes through how to make memory locations and what we use them for, and making the process of making tracks. So let's say you're in a group, you've got to this point, we've split up in the group, and so we've got, let's say the music, this was DT1, so the original Daryl decided to do the music tracks and maybe a little bit of the effects. And so the effects is DT1 and 3, shall we say, while Daryl 2 did all the dialogue, just went through and put these places in. So this is just making placeholders with clip groups, and you should have watched the video of the creation of those individual parts. So this video is about how to put it all together. Now if you've got a blank session that you started from that had the same memory locations and all the tracks listed out, it's just a simple matter of importing the track information from these other 3 sessions. So there's a thing in Pro Tools called import session data, which allows you to choose exactly what you're taking from another session. So here's my completed session. So I want to bring in the music first, or it doesn't actually matter. So I'm just going to go down to the import dialog under the file menu, file, import and session data. From here on in I'll use this hotkey here, which is Shift Option I. So always I for import, and then various modifier keys. So here I go, import session data. So that'll be 2 things. First of all, it's going to ask me which session I want to take the data from. So as we can see here, within my session folder, here are the individual parts. It doesn't matter if they're separate session folders that you've been working on your own machine and you've brought them in on a USB stick or anything like that. They can still be imported to this master session. Open that up, and what that does is brings up the import session data dialog box. So there's properties of the source, so this is the session that I'm importing from. So this is a good way to check that your frame rates are at the right level, and that your sample rate, audio sample rate, video frame rate, file type and bit depth are all in sync, I guess, so that you won't have any problems importing or playback. There's some media options, copying from the source media, which is probably a good one to go for because it copies it into your own master file folder. Consolidate from source media, that means actually to bounce out the files. In this case they're not really files. Or link to source media where possible. And that's a dangerous one, I wouldn't use that, so I'd leave that as copy from source media. If you link to the source media, it's essentially, it won't copy the file into your session folder, it'll just access it from wherever else it is. And that's how you end up with missing bits. Probably won't matter for this session, but if you're using it for other things, it could be important. Sample rate conversion, so this is if you need it. It should tick itself naturally. There's the mapping options, so do we want it to be absolute time? So if it was recorded at 1 second in the source, it'll go to 1 second in the master session. Track offsets, don't worry about it. I mean, it's if you did have, slight issues with things lining up, I guess you could do that, but I can't think of a scenario where that would be useful. So this top half of the dialog box is pretty much stuff you leave alone. It's good to know what it is, but you don't need to change anything usually by default, just to drag things in. And this is a sort of workflow that's sometimes used instead of templates. So what you'll have is, say I could make a session called a template session. So I might make a track, and I'll put my plugin chain on it that I use as my go-to chain for vocals, and maybe even my inputs and outputs if I use a particular outboard preamp or some way that I'm set up. And this just allows me to be able to import that track with all of the plugins and everything into whatever session I'm working on. So when it comes time to record vocals, I'll navigate my import session data to my template session and pick the track I want to bring in. Super easy. So in this case, remember we are looking for the music tracks because it's the music edit session. So it's a simple matter of just picking the tracks I want to bring in. And in this case, I don't want to make a new track. I want to use an existing one. So I'm going to go music contents. So think of it as the left-hand side is the stuff you're importing, and the right-hand side is where it's going to. So I'm just going to bring everything into there. What am I going to bring in, you ask? Well, that's what the last section's about. So from the session data itself, I can bring in global things like tempo maps, key signature and chord maps, markers and memory locations. So if I didn't have markers and memory locations in this session, I could bring them in from the other session that I've got, the source session. Basically any of these things. Main playlist options. So the main playlist is the visible and audible track within Pro Tools in the timeline. I can either overwrite everything that's there or add to it. So this is kind of like MIDI merge, but for imported data. Or I can not import. This is useful if I was bringing in just the markers to set up a session. But I'm just going to leave it as import and replace existing playlists. And the last thing is a big menu called track data to import. So this is everything about a track and whether you want to import that. So alternate playlists, clips and media, clip gain, clip effects, a bunch of automation, input and output, and send assignments, all the stuff you can choose to either bring in or leave behind. I'm just going to leave it all on because I just want to bring it in. I could just hold option, untick everything except for clips and media. And then because it's got no other real parameters or routing set up, I could just bring that in and it should work out fine. But just in case, I mean, there's no alternative playlists, so it'll do nothing. I haven't done any clip gain or clip effects, so it'll do nothing. All of this stuff just won't happen. So once I've decided what I want, I hit OK, and then I just say, yes, I want these things to go there. And bang, there's the clips or the clip group placeholders that I've made for the music files. And if you want to know about that, there's a music edit video that you can go back to if you missed it somehow. So now I'll go to the dialog. So remember our key command was Option Shift I, which brings up this, and I want to point myself towards the dialog edit session now. Double click that, don't worry about this stuff. Find my dialog session, and I've got June, the radio voice. I'm just holding Shift to select it, which I don't actually need to do because if I click on it, it's there. Zombie Sniper, Zombie Walker 1. Now that doesn't exist because I just had one track of Zombie Walker, but I realized there were some shots where there were 3 or 4 zombies in there, so I want to make individual sounds for each of them. So I'm going to bring those in, and Zombie Bomber, and finally the shark, the dialogue of the shark, which is pretty much rah. For nearly all of them, I'm going to assign it, or bring in the track. So June will be June. I'm going to assign it. This is the source material to go on to this track. The radio voice, that'll go on to radio voice. Sniper will go on to sniper. This is where it gets tricky. I don't have a Zombie Walker 1, so I'm going to tell that one to go to Zombie Walker. And then these other 2 I actually made in the other session, so this is importing new tracks. So I'm going to make it a new track and rename that Zombie Walker 1. Easy, look at that. So I've got my mix, or my MX music file in the folder, and I've got my dialogue in the folder now too. And you can see I've gone through and marked out every bit of dialogue. And finally, the effects track, heaps of effects. This is quite a tedious process, so something you might consider doing when you're importing is, let's go Shift Option I, choose the effects edit, and this is done by 2 different arrows. And what I'm going to use here is match tracks. So if there's a track here like Atmos Harbour, match track will assign Atmos Harbour to go to an existing track called Atmos Harbour. So it's a quick way to pick all the files you want. If I hit that, you'll notice they all suddenly come up. Now I don't want to bring in my video file, and I don't want to bring in the OG soundtrack, and I don't actually want to bring in the music or the dialogue because I've done that already. So I'll just get down there and shift click. Shift click behavior does not work for turning things off. Cool. So now it should be just the effects tracks that are left. When I did the effects edit, I decided to delete a couple of tracks that I didn't need in this session, and they don't appear in this list, so it's not a problem. They just won't have anything imported to them. But they don't appear in this list because this list is looking at the source file, that session file I chose to import from. So it's not looking at these tracks here to receive any information. So simple as picking match tracks, going in and hitting OK, provided I'm happy with all the other settings. And there is all the effects. Squeeze that folder track up. We can see underneath I've got some long Atmos tracks that are going to be layered over the top and constantly running, and then a heap of other little one-shot samples and things going through it. So essentially what I've got now, and I'll just save this as my Zombie Army 4 trailer master track. Maybe I'll call it the master layout. And this is essentially the file that I need for my production plan, just like we talked about in class. Hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, don't forget to save. Ka kite anō.